Stories of personal loss and disappointment arise daily from the COVID-19 pandemic. Disputes, violence, addictions, bankruptcies, and suicides are escalating at alarming rates. Restriction and isolation are affecting millions of Americans. Our cold response to loss is harmful as we chill our emotions and freeze our relationships, and those with the most need suffer alone. All this occurs as we attempt to normalize the absence of our human connections. Grieving loss in a healthy manner is critically important to our well-being. Unfortunately, we're often told to do otherwise, and the results are damaging. If our grief remains unattended, it will haunt us for years to come. Grief's answer to COVID-19 is much different than what's been occurring. This 5-part video series highlights the damaging responses we've adopted during the pandemic. It reveals how a healthy grieving practice enables us to grow and thrive through our losses. Learn healthy strategies and practical ways to better respond to daily events, find meaning through your losses, and begin moving toward contentment and optimism.
Hello, thank you for watching. I'm Daryl Powers, and I'm hosting the third part of our 5-series live stream session titled Grief's Answer to COVID, where we're looking at the COVID-19 pandemic and healthy grieving through the lens of what we're doing today, and even sometimes what we're being told to do. And what we're finding is there's quite a contrast between healthy grieving and what's been going on and what our behaviors have been. In week 1, we talked about bypassing our grief and some of the challenges that occur with that, and how we have a tendency to want to get past it and sometimes set ourselves up for problematic behaviors and relationships. And last week, we followed that path a little further. We considered some of the damaging consequences that can result when we bypass our grief. We heard from Lori Badura, the founder of SOFA, Inc. She explained how COVID restrictions and isolation have negatively affected the pace of drug addiction, relapse, even suicides in our communities. She highlighted the importance of making simple, extra efforts to reach out to others, to let them know we care. Simple things we can do every day. Now, today's program, we're going to focus some attention on ourselves. I know, we're going to focus on ourselves. We're going to look at some of the primary things which grief requires of us and the things that we need to do to manage our response to this pandemic and to our own losses in a healthy way. Melissa Minkley will outline the core requirements of healthy grieving for us, while our guest, Tom Ginn, shares a simple, transformational process anyone can use to grow throughout challenging times. As the co-founder of Life Empowered Institute, Tom coaches groups and individuals to drive toward personal success and satisfaction. He spent over 30 years in the business industry as an entrepreneur, a small business owner, and an executive in the financial services industry. The more I get to know Tom, the more I get to appreciate what he teaches and the benefit of learning from him. I'm really getting to understand what it's like to live a life of fulfillment. So this program is going to be fantastic today. It's delivered by the Grief Training Center of Wisconsin. The Grief Training Center of Wisconsin delivers training, resource, and community to professionals and volunteers who support the bereaved. We're glad you're here today. Right now we are live, but this program is also being recorded. You can view it later on, and what also you can do later on is share this video, and I'll direct you where to find it. You can find it on our website. You can see the banner right below, grieftrainingnow.com. It's grieftrainingnow.com. You can go onto the website. Right on the front page, you'll see an icon for Facebook and for YouTube. You can click on any of those, and it'll take you to the recorded version of this program. You can also find it on our website menu in the Insights and Resources tab. In there, you'll find a recording of this program. It'll take maybe 12 hours for it to upload, but that's where you'll be able to find it, and you can view it later on, or you can share it or direct somebody to find it there. We really need to get the word out on this to other people, because this is helpful content, and we've been receiving some very encouraging responses from those who've been seeing it. So thank you out there. The responses that you've given to me in writing, and in some cases in person, I really appreciate it, because it's encouraging. Some of these topics are difficult. It sometimes is a bit nerve-wracking to put this out in the open, and grief is always a difficult topic to cover. But the responses we've been getting from you and the encouragement that I've been getting is really helpful, and it's making a big difference. We know we're on the right track, you guys. You're telling us we are definitely on the right track with what we're covering here. So, also, please, I invite you to use the chat function today. If you have questions or comments, or you just want to leave a hello, please use the chat and let us know. So, with that, we'll get started. I'll bring on Melissa, and we can set up what she describes as some of the core components of grief's requirements. And then we'll bring on Tom Ginn, and he can give us some insight into what to do once we understand that and how we process that to be able to take ourselves into a better future. So I welcome Melissa Minkley. Hi, Melissa.
Hello there.
How are you?
I'm doing well. It was interesting when I was preparing for this topic, trying to put together what does grief require from us. I was thinking, I'm kind of simplifying it. And grief isn't simple though. So grief is complex, and it's unique to each individual. So when I was putting this together, I was thinking, wow, I've come up with this simple approach, and I don't want anybody to receive it that way as well, because it is hard work. It is. It requires.
Grief is a mess.
It's messy. Yeah, that's great way to describe it. It's very messy. So what I've done is just kind of identify some key things that it's important to take in consideration as we're attending to our grief.
Wonderful. Thank you. I've listened to you quite a bit, and I've been taught by you in a variety of different circumstances, and all within the arena of grief. And Melissa, you do have a wonderful way of taking something complicated, taking something obscure, taking something emotionally charged, and being able to narrow it down so someone like me can get my hands around it and understand it a little bit. So I appreciate your ability to simplify something as complicated as grief.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes, exactly. And, we've been talking about all the different losses that people are experiencing because of the pandemic. Not just because of the pandemic, but just in general. I mean, losses that have been occurring over the years for many of us. And one of the things that I've noticed that people have shared with me is that they find themselves just kind of lost, just kind of wandering, not really having any direction during this pandemic. And, I'm reminding them of, well, those are symptoms, those are reactions to grief, and so what grief requires of us, the initial thing that grief requires from us is to set our intention, to acknowledge the grief and say, okay, how am I going to experience this? How do I want to experience this? It's being deliberate about how we're going to actively participate in attending to our grief needs. It's not only asking, how am I going to do this, or how do I need to do this, but it's also asking, being intentional about who am I going to do this with, because we can't do this alone. We can't do this alone. We do need to do this in community and with support. So
when it's interesting in the age of COVID, it makes it that much harder, because we're told to isolate, separate, close yourself in. It's quite the opposite.
Yeah, it is. So we're asked to be a little bit more creative, extending ourselves, doing things. I've never considered hosting a grief support group virtually, but I am now, and it's actually going very well. I'm surprised at our capacity to be able to gather in that format and still receive and give support. So it's a time of us to get creative and take some risks and explore and find new ways of connecting. because that is what grief requires of us, is to connect with others.
Well, I guess, even last week, Lori Bedura touched on that the first 6 months of COVID, it was really hard. And there was a lot of wreckage in the arena of drug addiction and depression and relapses. People couldn't get to meetings. She said, at least now, though it's still difficult, people are at least reaching out a little bit more, and they are using some of the technology, not maybe because it's ideal, but at least it's available and it works for us. And it is making a difference. It is.
And so once we set our intention, once we say, okay, grief, alrighty, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be thoughtful about it, and I'm going to commit. And it's committing to ourselves, and it's committing to healing. So once we set our intention, then we have to kind of pay attention to grief. I know grief is very uncomfortable, so why would we want to pay attention to it? We would rather dismiss it. Why would we want to lean into this discomfort that a grief creates for us? Well, because when we give it attention, it softens. When we give it attention, it leads to healing. It's when we ignore it and avoid it, it gets harder and it makes more noise and it causes a little bit more, it becomes more complicated, and it's even more of a struggle to be able to cope with grief. So grief requires attention. And so how do we do that? Well, we lean into the pain. We allow ourselves to feel the discomfort. We ask questions. We ask grief questions, and we try to learn what's it all about.
Melissa, what do you mean by grief questions? What kind of questions would there be?
Well, exploring what you're feeling, maybe why you're feeling that way, what you want to do with that feeling. There's a lot of different grief reactions. So these are things that we react to, and it varies from person to person. So those reactions vary from our thoughts and feelings that we experience because of a loss, but it also has a lot to do with our behaviors. And we behave in ways because of grief, and we find ourselves even cognitively having a hard time making decisions and processing information or focusing. And we may even struggle with being with certain people when we're grieving. We may become a little bit more irritable, less tolerant of dealing with trivial situations. So all those things are our reaction to grief. But we want to respond to grief. We want to respond to it. So by allowing ourselves to explore and gain a better understanding of what we're experiencing, and maybe ask those kind of why, or what's this about, or what's behind this, those are all good things, because that leads us to a better understanding of what our needs are, what we need, and who we need to guide us and help us through this process. So that's what I mean by asking questions. It's really just kind of exploring.
Sometimes it is easy for us to really just kind of skip along, right? We want to just move right along, and because I think not only asking those questions, all right, that's a challenge, but it's the answers that we find. That's the scary part. Sometimes we don't really want to dive that deep.
Right. Sometimes things are revealed to us that, are uncomfortable and we really don't want to look at. But like I said before, once we look at them, once we give it attention, sometimes they're not as scary as we initially thought they were going to be. From my personal experience, that's something I have learned over and over again is that, I made it out to be worse than it really was, and so I always encourage people to not to be so fearful of grief. But that's why that other piece is really important, to do that with people, to do it with people versus feeling you have to do it alone, because that piece can be very scaring. But when you surround yourself with good people that can help you through that, it just makes it a little bit more manageable. And that's the other thing that grief requires of us. I talked about intention and attention, but really it requires compassion, and not only compassion from other people, to support us, but compassion for ourselves. I always say we need to treat ourselves the way we would treat a dear friend who's going through something very similar. That's the kind of conversations we should be having with ourselves, not getting discouraged and disappointed and frustrated with ourselves because of the way we're reacting to our grief. That's one thing I noticed about during the pandemic. A lot of people were saying, I used to be so productive. I used to get so much done in a day. And now I'm, I find myself, struggling to concentrate and focus. And they're just getting very discouraged and frustrated, but not recognizing, well, there's a reason why. That is what grief does to us. And so rather than being beating ourselves up, be a little bit more compassionate and create more opportunities for you to rest, because that's what grief requires, is us to rest, rather than looking at that resting as a bad thing. No, it's a good thing, because that's what grief is requiring of you.
And I wonder, Melissa, too, if part of the reason we don't recognize it as much, right? We're struggling or just in a hard mood, and maybe consistently in a hard mood. It's maybe because we diminish our own loss. We touched on that in one of the earlier sessions, that when we diminish our own loss, we're not recognizing it, even though we should. So if we're not recognizing as loss because we're diminishing it or dismissing it or pretending like it doesn't exist, then we may struggle because of it, but not recognize that as the reason why we're struggling.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. It's important that we don't diminish the loss. We have to acknowledge the loss, but when we allow ourselves to when we attend to our grief, the grief does diminish. But it's through that giving it that attention. Does that make sense?
Yep. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
But it's hard work. It's hard work. And when I started out saying I didn't want to make this too simple to look like, it's really easy to do. No, I recognize that it is hard work. And so it's always that balance of allowing ourselves to do the hard work, but then also recognizing the need to take a break and rest. We need to also find some opportunities to nurture ourselves and give ourselves a break from grief.
Yeah, you think about when we take on anything in life where we need to grow and learn. I've got kids in school, right? They're working on that, working on it all the time. It's challenging for them. They have to remain disciplined, and they have to take on some harder challenges. When we're striving in our careers, or maybe in a relationship, and we're putting this extra effort into it and this focus, and there takes some internal drive and discipline in order to do that well. It sounds like it's kind of the same thing with grief. It's if we don't attend to it, if we don't really invest in it, then probably not going to do very well with it. But yet everything else in our life, we would think, of course, you invest in that. If you want to do well in that, you put an effort into it, and you work at it, and you learn, and you struggle, and you keep climbing, and it's going to work for you. But when it comes to grief, it's like, no, we don't consider it that way. And it seems that we should.
Yeah, most definitely we should. Because what we put into it is on the other end, we will come out, hopefully stronger, with a wisdom, from that experience, with an understanding, with an ability to be able to companion and be compassionate towards other people who are experiencing a hardship.
Well, and start to live a life that is different than the one we have now in the present. To hope to earn something better. Mm-hmm. And even if it's not tangible, maybe just the things within ourselves. That's why I'm excited to have Tom here with us today, because when I listen to how he teaches and what he teaches, it speaks right to this about having to really kind of dig deeper inside yourself and find some of that power that you didn't recognize you have, and then start to turn it in a way so it works for you. Melissa, I'm going to take an opportunity here to bring Tom on for a little while. I want him because really want him to contribute to what you're saying here, because I think that where he's coming from, I think is going to marry up very well with this.
Good.
Tom, hi.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you fine.
Wonderful.
Melissa, I think you can hear Tom. I suspect our audience can hear all three of us. So, Tom, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate this.
It's my pleasure and honor to be here and talk about the loss and grief and those type of things, and finding ways, like addressing some of the things that Melissa said, is what do we do differently to work ourselves through the loss and the grief. And what I'll be covering here, and you just want me to sort of jump into that right now, Daryl?
Jump right in. Okay. Jump wherever you want.
I think myself being a personal development coach, it's really important to understand how we form our thinking around whatever we're thinking about. How did we learn how to deal with grief and loss? And like Daryl said in the beginning, in the opening, is many times it's not the right way. And through understanding and awareness, there are ways that you can deal with loss and grief in a very effective way. It doesn't diminish the loss or diminish the grief, but allows you to focus intentionally how to deal with it in a positive way. And how can a loss be positive? How can the loss of somebody be positive? Well, what I'm going to share with you, it's really important to understand that this is not woo-woo, but there's science behind understanding what I'm going to share here. But when we have a loss, it throws us into all sorts of emotional turmoils, and everybody's going to respond or react totally different based on life experiences, what they've been taught. And how do we get ourselves out of that? I call it the whirlwind of what's going on. You just lost your job of COVID. You can't intermingle with your loved ones that may be in an institution. Those are all losses. And at an emotional level, we can't comprehend. We lose our ability to focus at an emotional level. So how do we get ourselves to a place where we can embrace it with a different perspective?
Wow, Tom and Melissa, it sounds like what you were just saying, as Melissa, we were describing earlier. We kind of struggle with this confusion, but we don't really know what to attach it to. We don't really identify it. And Tom, you think you nailed it there.
Yeah. And before I get into some very specifics of what you asked me to speak about, I want to preface this: it's not negating loss; it's embracing it in a different way. But when we have loss, whether it be a personal loss, loss of a loved one or a job or our business, or can't meet with our family, what COVID's done, when we have the loss, it impacts how we look at the world moving forward. So what happens, I always, being a coach here, I always help people understand what's going to drive you through difficulty in life is your vision and why. And if we've lost something, we need to refocus our vision or reframe our vision to something positive. So that's one of the things when I work with a client is, how is this affecting the outcome in the future? I've lost my job. That's going to impact how I take care of my family financially. I may lose my house, and it just or I lost somebody. So how do we reframe that in the future so you move positively to that, instead of focusing on the loss, but focusing on a new outcome in and around the loss? So I'm going to use three principles today around this, how we can take a loss and grief, and by shifting our thoughts. And the first word that I want in thought is gratitude, the power of gratitude, and how that works. People say It's easy to be grateful when things are going good. And like Melissa said, it's going to take some work. So gratitude is a very powerful word. There's a lot of science and research to understand how it shifts us emotionally. See, a loss is an emotional feeling. We know it. We lost. We hurt. We're frustrated. We're scared. We're angry. We go into all sorts of different places. How do we change that feeling that's not comfortable? How do we do that? And research shows this: by shifting your thought to gratitude, empowers you. It gives hope. It has a lot of different things that gratitude will do, but you have to learn how to use gratitude to shift that thinking. And that's where you talk intentional. It takes work. Hey, it's easy to be grateful when things are going great.
Mm-hmm.
How can I be grateful when I lost my loved one? How can I be grateful when I lost my job? So by understanding how gratitude shifts our emotional, it empowers us to, instead of reacting. Most of our loss and our grief and things is we've been taught how to react, not to respond. Totally two different things.
Mm-hmm.
So gratitude is a great way to deal with it. And just I'll share with you the science behind it. Is when we feel good, our body, our neurotransmitters, our neurochemistry is releasing endorphins and dopamines. So when we're under stress, your chemistry is it's not positive. But how do you shift that? You can shift it quickly with a new thought. Doesn't negate that the loss was there, but it shifts the feeling. And when we move to a state of well-being, a good feeling, and we'll just leave it at that, it puts you back in power. It gives you an opportunity to look at the situation in a different perspective so you can move forward through that. So is understanding that the thoughts we hold dictates how we feel emotionally. And keep in mind, you can change how you feel instantaneously with understanding these principles. What I'd like to say is understanding the power. Go ahead, Daryl.
Man, it's just something just occurred to me. If you think about, bringing in a little bit wider umbrella on this, just think about all the negative inputs that we tend to get. If you look at any news headline, just about anything on social media, it's unreal. Everything's an outrage. Everything's a problem. Everything, right? So if you're talking about trying to focus your attention on something that is optimistic and it's gratitude, well, everything that seems to be coming at us seems to be the opposite. There's always a dispute about something.
And that causes us to react, that stimuli, and keep us maybe in that cycle of negativity or whatever. We need to stop it. And there's some very specific principles to do that. Is keep in mind your mind can't occupy two thoughts in the same space. Can't do it. Can't harbor a negative thought and a positive thought in the same space. But learning how to reframe your thinking changes how we respond versus react. Most of our things dealing with loss and grief is reactionary. What we've learned from our environment, how we were brought up with grief, how our society and culture has planted seeds of how to deal with it. Some of it's good, most of it's not. Okay, from my perspective. So how do you do that? Is understanding that loss and grief is on one side of the coin. Gratitude's on the other. And if we can just flip the coin and go to gratitude, and how we do that is a process. And I teach that. It is very simple to do. But here's something I would like to plant the seed with who's ever listening to this is start the process of gratitude today, even before you have a loss. You may have had some losses in the past that you can take the gratitude principle and apply and reconcile that loss and that grief, but start an exercise of gratitude. What are you grateful for? Now, if you lost your job, there was a lot of good things about the job that you could be grateful for. Be grateful for the fact that you have unlimited potential. Be grateful for that you've had a job, you know how to get a job. Be grateful. That changes the shifting, just how your energy empowers you versus taking that emotional spiral down, because it can do that. How do you stop that? And go to the opposite of loss. What is good about the situation you're in? There's good in everything. Focus on that. If you lost somebody, focus on what they brought to your life and the people around you, especially if you're in that transition of making the arrangements. If you're such in an emotional state, but if you can just shift what that person brought to you in your life, you'll be able to focus on all the details and all the other things that come along with grief. And you put yourself in an empowering place just by being grateful. Okay. And I'll cover a principle here in a second with you. The other word is joy. Be joyful. Be joyful. And I always like to use the story is that, people seek happiness. Well, you can change happiness instantaneously. It's just a short-term event. But joy also has the same power as gratitude. That relationship that gave you joy, not happiness, something is lasting and enduring. That's what you want to focus on moving forward in that area of loss, because it's the fuel that gives you hope to reorganize your thinking at an emotional level. So, any comments there, Daryl or Melissa?
Mm-hmm. Right. I know that for a lot of people, especially when they're in the depth of their grief, when we encourage them to be grateful and seek out joy, they look at me and they say, "Oh, it's hard. It's hard because the pain I'm feeling right now is sharp and raw." And just to clarify that this seeking gratitude and joy is part of the process, in addition to nurturing the pain and sorrow. It's not one or the other, but it's about both. And I guess that's the piece that I try really hard to help people to understand is that balance is critical. Finding balance when we're doing doing our grief work is so important, because it's not all joy and gratitude, and it's not all pain and sorrow. It's both. And to be able to experience both in the midst of your loss is really what we're talking about. That's the work we're talking about.
Yeah, I would call it emotional homeostasis, that you're bringing things into some sort of balance that you can deal with. It doesn't negate that you didn't have pain and a loss, but it just brings you back to a state of well-being, even though things aren't good.
Right.
And how do you develop this is a life practice, is having a space of gratitude daily for the littlest things. I'm so happy and grateful now. I'm grateful for my friends. I'm grateful for the cup of coffee. I'm grateful for my relationships. And just understand our emotions give us feeling. The vibration we're in. We know when we're angry. We know when we're grieving, that vibration. We know how we feel when we're in a state of joy. And what you want to know is notice what you notice by what you think, because you can shift that thinking as you need to move forward and deal with it more healthy, I guess is the best way to put it. I don't know if that's the appropriate, but in a different way. And so gratitude, understanding the power of it, making it part of your life, because we all have had traumas. We've all had some sort of loss in life to one degree or another. But wouldn't it be a great thing to create that discipline of gratitude on a daily basis? So when we hit, it's just a matter of when, right? That something's going to happen in our lives that creates some sort of great loss or grief. We can't identify it. Wouldn't it be nice to be in that situation? You know how to deal with it in the beginning and understand how you use gratitude. And I recommend that you have a journal. Write 2 to 3 things down you're grateful for. Let other people know you're grateful for them. Because one of the greatest things that people have in loss is they didn't let their loved ones know how much they appreciated them. They may pass with some sort of regret. So being grateful. Go ahead.
That is a really strong point. I love what you just said there. How often we talked a little bit about it last week, but how often we just underappreciate how important that is. How much, how often we just tend to think about it only when we think that, wow, it's really going to count, or there's really something exceptional that we should say, or maybe there was a problem and it makes us, to your point, wow, what would happen if we just express, not just think about our gratitude for our relationships, but express that to some people along the way. Just reach out or in a conversation. Wow, I really appreciate it. Tom, I really appreciate you coming on today. I really do. This was fantastic learning. And I'm glad you're taking the time. It makes me feel better to say that.
Absolutely. Notice what you know. Notice what you feel. Giving and receiving gratitude. And we haven't been taught to use gratitude other than when things are going good.
Right. Or somebody passes you the butter at dinner, right? Okay, so thank you. And that's about it.
Yeah. So, there's a process to do that. Joy has the same energy vibration. It focuses at an emotional level to a good feeling. And that's how you get out of that state that you can move forward and, get back on a vision, get back on a process that will keep your life in homeostasis. And just be joyful in the relationship of the loss. What was it? And when you go there, you're able to deal with things totally different. And there's a lot of science and research on how that works. And a simple exercise I encourage people to do. When you're in that state of anxiety, of loss or fear, whatever's the emotions associated with loss and grief, there's a very simple process that you can do to shift that thought from that thought is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's a countdown you do, and then you read, because gratitude and joy are the opposite of loss and grief. It gives you that opportunity to switch that negative thought, that hurtful thought, that angry thought, or whatever it is, and now you focus on something that brings you gratitude and joy, and notice what you notice. Now you're in control of that situation versus the loss and grief controlling you. And
yeah.
So
and like you said earlier, Tom, react. Where you do this little countdown, you flip the switch to gratitude, joy, and now it's respond.
Then take action.
Respond. Yeah, it's something that now I'm intentionally doing going forward rather than backpedaling because it keeps coming at me.
Because if the people just understand the power of that, it does create action in a different way. And that's what we're looking for. How am I going to deal with this loss?
Yeah, I guess you're right. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Right. So it's the first thing, and then this translates into an actionable event, even if it's immediate and simple.
Like Melissa said, explore your feelings. Know what they are. We can't really get through them if we can't really understand what they are. Is it anger? Is it something else? And then, through gratitude and being joyful, we can sort that feeling out and deal with it effectively in a different way. So it's a lifestyle is dealing with gratitude and joy. And that's what I like to just share. So anything else, any other questions you have of me?
Tom, this is fantastic. You gave us a lot to chew on here. I mean, you said it at the beginning, like, I'm going to give you three simple words. You packed a lot into this. There's an awful lot in that. I really appreciate it. I'm expressing, Tom, I truly appreciate this. Melissa, what you offered today, I really appreciate. I appreciate the opportunity that we're in a position where we can come together. even through this technology, be able to share this. I appreciate the fact that we can push this out and get this to other people who it really might affect today. Someone might hear this today and might be just enough to really change what they're doing. Maybe change how they handle a relationship. Maybe change a situation that they're confronting. I appreciate that. I have gratitude for what we're doing here.
Yeah,
feel great.
And I just encourage people to reach out in loss. Yeah. Being able to reach out during loss, because we culturally says we suppress it.
Yeah, I don't want to bother anyone with that. I don't want to bring them down.
Yeah.
Who wants to? No one wants to hear all my garbage. I'll just keep it in, keep it to myself. Right.
And I'm gonna leave it with this last phrase. I am so happy and grateful now. And you fill in the blank after that, and watch what happens when we deal with loss. Grief is just using that. I am so happy and grateful now, the moment, and watch what happens to your feelings, and you'll understand the power of gratitude, joy, and then you'll be able to operate and deal with it in a different way. So,
Tom, thank you. We're coming up on our time here, but that you really ended on a high note here with that. I am so happy and grateful now that blank.
Exactly.
Melissa, thank you very much for your time as well. You guys,
you're welcome.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna close out here so we can wrap up on time. I want you both to really have a great day, at least as best you can with whatever you have in front of you. And thanks both of you.
Thank you. My honor.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, you guys.
Bye-bye.